I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The people who immigrated from Japan basically came for a better life. Their country had changed the leadership. The emperor was now Meiji. He controlled the country. Many came because their families were so poor. They needed to send money back, and they would see some of these people who came over and were returning to Japan or sending money to their families, and their families were able to keep their little plots of land that they had been farming for centuries. As people heard more from others, their experiences, they decided, yes, they can go too. And then they sent for picture brides. And of course, some of the men had sent pictures not of themselves as they are, but as themselves as they were, as they were younger, or wearing somebody else's nice jacket, or in front of somebody else's nice house.
What they did is the men sent their pictures back to Japan and to a place or to a home or somewhere, and the ladies would go there and see these pictures. Such as my mother had 3 sisters, so she wanted to come to this country to start a new life also. She found this picture and she said, I'll take them. So what they did, the ladies did now, was that they took this picture to a place and they got married by proxy. Basically, there was a guy there and says, I want to marry this picture, and his name is so-and-so. So he said, no problem, to get married. So she got married to the picture. So now she had a marriage certificate. Now she could take the marriage certificate to the shipping lines and said, I have a husband. So now she had a husband and his picture. She got a ticket and over she came.
The Japanese people first came to the United States as hard-working laborers. They came as poor immigrants and were easily identified because of their physical appearance. When they were forced out of the labor market, they turned to what they knew best, farming. Fathers, mothers, and children worked together in the fields 7 days a week throughout the year. Consequently, the poor farming soil they were permitted to rent began over time to yield bountiful harvests. Their prosperity, however, provoked resentment and bitterness in many Americans. To make matters worse, by 1939, Japan, the country the immigrants had left behind, was engaged in a brutal war with allies of the United States.
The atmosphere in 1941-42 was so bad against the Japanese people. Discrimination was horrible. The newspapers, the Hearst newspapers, the radio, the only lines of communication we had in those days, they were all against us. And seems like every writer would write, they don't belong here, send them back to Japan. The radio would say, watch out for them because they're your enemy. Don't give them anything. Don't trust them to anything. This is 1941, before December 7. So the whole atmosphere was, these are, because there was a lot of jealousy as the Japanese people were prospering. So the atmosphere was, you're an enemy and you don't belong here. We don't want you here. There were signs all over, no Japs wanted.
On December 7, 1941, Emperor Hirohito of Japan declared war on the United States through a surprise bombing attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. Because it was a surprise attack, on that day, more than 2,300 Americans lost their lives, and over 1,200 more were seriously injured. This vicious act of terror enraged the United States and acted as a catalyst to heave anger and hostility upon Japanese American families.
So what was I doing on the day Japan dropped the bomb on Pearl Harbor? Well, I had no idea what had happened until I went to school the next day. We were so happily working on the farm that Sunday. But when I went to school, all of a sudden, my friends were avoiding me. And I'd walk down the hallway and they'd pretend they didn't see me. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I felt like I had done something terrible. And I said, well, how's it going to affect me? Where is Pearl Harbor? You know, I'm a citizen. I'm an American. I was born in Sacramento.
There wasn't anything said about what was going to happen to us, but because we knew that it was Japan and our family was from Japan, that was a concern. The next day was a Monday, which was a school day. My very best friend, Mary Frances, came up to me and she said, I have to tell you something. My mama told me to tell you that I can't play with you anymore because you're Japanese. That really hurt me. My feelings were so hurt. I wanted to cry, but I was very brave. But I cried inside.
I was only 12 years old and really didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. But I noticed that my parents were stunned and said very little, but their body language said that they were really concerned. We had a knock on the door and there were 3 plainclothes men who happened to be the FBI. The search took about 2.5 hours, but the search was quite vigorous because they turned over the sofas to see if anything was hidden. Any books and photo albums were all checked over page by page, and they stripped away all the pictures.
Then there was this other agent in my parents' bedroom, and they were just dumping things out of the drawers and looking under the mattress. And then this third agent was in my bedroom, and he did the same thing. Then he opened my drawers and found my diary. And I was so, you know, you don't want anybody reading your diary. So anyway, I was ready to go and grab it. And I said, I stopped myself, and things were, you know, tense as it was. I said, now, you might create more problems if you did that. Sit down.
On February 19, 1942, 74 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This executive order basically turned over control of the entire west coast of the United States to General John L. DeWitt. General DeWitt ordered all 112,000 men, women, and children of Japanese heritage living on the West Coast to be rounded up and incarcerated in temporary assembly centers until permanent internment camps could be built. Without due process of law, they were forced to leave behind everything they had: their homes, pets, property, possessions, income, businesses, and their freedom, taking with them only what they could carry.
It was a time of turmoil. And another thing that upset so many people, including my dad and all the farmers, you know, farmers borrow against the crop that they're going to harvest. So they borrow from the bank, they plant the crops, and after the crops have been harvested, they get to pay the banks back. We were removed just before the harvest season. If there was a strategy or a plan in place to make sure that we lost our property and at least lost income, that was the way to do it. And my mother always lamented, why did they move us from our farms just at the beginning of the harvest season? Move us into temporary quarters that were just thrown together like fairgrounds and racetracks and temporary places, and then move us into our permanent camps in October when the harvest would have been over.
You talk about enemy aliens. They couldn't put citizens in a concentration camp, so they had a new word for us that was non-alien. I became a non-alien.
Well, Tanforan was one of about 27 assembly centers located along the coast. Now, Tanforan Racetrack was eventually going to hold 8,000 people. Some of us lived in the stables. They had built barracks for other people to live in. Some of the single men lived in the grandstand. When we got there, we unloaded our things and we were assigned our stable that we were to live in. It was about 9 feet by 20 feet. In my case, I went to Tanforan Racetrack, and we were there from roughly from the beginning of May until the end of August of 1942. The stable, of course, didn't have running water, so there was no cooking or no toilet facilities or showers in the stables.
My father, to help us feel better, because I don't think he knew how we felt, was, we're going on a train trip, won't that be fun? We'd never been on a train trip. The other thing to go with that was we get to have our own suitcases. So we went to the dime store, we got cardboard suitcases, not very sturdy. We had no idea what to put in there.
We went on the train ride to Fresno. It was long, it was hot, and I remember turmoil. Children were crying, people were arguing. And it wasn't until we arrived at the Fresno Assembly Center, which was the old Fresno, I think, County Fairgrounds, and saw the barbed wire fences, we realized what was going to happen to us.
Getting into that train, and that train moving away, was a devastating time for me. I was just turned 19 in May, and we left in May. And I thought I thought the president would change his mind and say, this is all wrong. Let's stop it. You may all go home. When that train started to move, I just couldn't help it. I just cried, broke down and just cried. When we got to Pinedale, the temporary camp, see, this camp was made for 5,000 inmates. And all around the place were guard towers with 2 guards up there and a machine gun. And they said, we're going to put you here for your protection. We said, how come that machine gun is pointing at us?